Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us in this new faith group series. After the rather heavy and depressing last faith group series on the book of Judges, we decided to lighten things up a little bit with this faith group series, something a bit more positive. And so we're going to be examining the fruit of the Spirit. We're calling it the Biblical Orchard. Real life models of the fruit of the Spirit. So we're going to talk about each fruit of the Spirit and then connect it to a real instance that fruit was presented in a biblical narrative. But first, a few preliminary notes. The fruit of the Spirit is found in St. Paul's letter to the Galatians. This book of the Bible is Paul's tour de force defense of justification by faith. He makes a strong and impassioned case that we are not saved by works, but by the gift of faith that is given to us. In chapter 5 of Galatians, then, Paul turns his attention to how this radical truth plays out in how we live our Christian lives. He asks, how do we live free? Well, Paul's answer to this is walk in the Spirit. Do not return to your old slavery to sin. Rather, walk in your newness of life. He then lists in chapter 5, verses 19 through 21, the various ways that people still walk in slavery. Everything from sorcery to orgies to jealousy and anger. And then, in verse 22, Paul introduces the fruit of the Spirit. He says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law." Now, back in the Old Testament, one of the laments of the prophets was that God's people failed to produce fruit. They would use imagery like a barren vineyard to illustrate the people's faithlessness. And they looked forward to the day in which that would all change. Well, at last, thanks to the gifting of the Holy Spirit, which is yours through holy baptism, there comes the Spirit's gifts and the Spirit's fruit. Now, it should be noted that when we're discussing the fruit of the Spirit throughout this series, we're not going to be giving you a to-do list. These are fruits, not works. We won't be telling you to get busy doing these things. Rather, the fruit finds its source not in you, but from the Spirit. They are His fruit. And since the Spirit is in you, they naturally flow out of you. And unlike the gifts of the Spirit described in other places, like 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where some have a certain gift and others have a different gift, as a Christian, sealed by the Holy Spirit, you have all of His fruit. It's yours. So let's take a look at the first one, which is love. It's fitting that love leads the list of fruits. St. Paul uses the noun love 72 times, 75 times in his letters, and the verb form of it he uses 34 times. Love describes God's relationship with His people and His motivation for the suffering death of His Son. And more than that, as we read 1 John, love describes God's very nature. For God is love. The Greek word used here, of course, is agape. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but there are several words for love in the Greek language. And of course, in English, we're limited to just one, love. And so I love my wife, Andrea, and I love a plate of nachos. Is it the same kind of love? It depends on the nachos, right? Hope she doesn't watch this. In Greek, agape love is the highest form of love. It's unconditional love, a love that, as Paul describes it in 1 Corinthians 13, can be patient and kind and keep no record of wrong, and so on. This is the kind of love shown by Jesus on the cross as he forgave his murderers. It's the kind of love that God has for you. And it's the kind of love that we find on display in a well-known account from 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 through 28. Now, King Solomon, as you remember, he was known for his wisdom. Indeed, when God invited Solomon to ask him for anything, Solomon chose wisdom over riches and fame. So God gave him it all. And that wisdom came in handy as he ruled his kingdom. And this little account from 1 Kings chapter 3 illustrates this. There's a debate between these two women. Both women had babies, had born babies. But one of the women rolled over in her sleep and suffocated her own child. And so she went to the other woman in the middle of the night and switched out her dead child for the woman's living baby. Well, of course, when the real mother woke up and saw this child, she knew, of course, that it was not her own and that this other woman had made a switch. And so they brought this situation to King Solomon that he might decide between the two. So I like the way Eugene Peterson puts this in the Message, how he translates this. It says, they went back and forth in this way in front of the king. And the king said, what are we to do? And the woman says, this woman says, this living son is mine and the dead one is yours. And the other woman says, no, the dead one is yours and the living one is mine. After a moment, the king said, bring me a sword. And they brought a sword to the king. And he said, cut the living baby in two. Give half to one and the other half to another. And the real mother of the living baby was overcome with emotion for her son and said, oh no, master, give her the whole baby alive. Don't kill him. The other one said, if I can't have him, you can't have him either. Cut away. And the king gave his decision. Give the living baby to the first woman. Nobody is going to kill this baby. She is the real mother. And the word got around, and everyone in Israel heard the king's judgment, and they were in awe of the king, realizing that it was God's wisdom that enabled him to judge truly. He had no intention of actually killing this baby, but he knew that the woman with the true love, that actually had that fruit of the Spirit and love for the child, would reveal herself as the true mother. And what selfless love this woman displays here. And that's what this fruit is all about. The love of the Spirit is selfless love. Love that looks out for the other. It's not a feeling, but it's a choice. It's a loving response. And in the verses right before the fruit of the Spirit, God lists the ways that we still walk in bondage. He says, he lists among those things sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality. And I think in these days we're so confused about love and we think that these things are loving. But genuine love, the fruit of the Spirit, is never self-gratifying. It's always other-centered. It's sacrificial. How have you seen this love played out in the world. I think of Christians forgiving their loved one's murderer. We've seen it several times, especially in the cases of some of these mass shootings. I think of people reaching out in charity. I think of those giving their lives for others. The fruit of the Spirit, love, is present in those situations, and it's always surprising and startling and beautiful. How have you seen this fruit played out in your life? Maybe it's harder to see. We have a hard time patting ourselves on the back. Maybe you don't feel like you have it, but you do. Remember, you are sealed by the Holy Spirit. You belong to Him. The Spirit is active in you, bearing this fruit. And so I want you to discuss that with your faith group. And remember, it is the fruit of the Spirit here. So when you talk about it in your life, you're not going to be bragging about yourself. Instead, you'll be bragging about and praising God. So, blessings on your conversation. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you in church.